Well, hello everyone. Welcome into the Striker Texas MLS Podcast. I'm John Arnold, joined today by Chris Bills in Austin, Victor Ariza in Houston. Listen, guys, this is how it works. I go away, the team I cover loses, I come back, the team I cover wins, and the teams you cover lose. That's how it works. That's how it works. I'm the lucky charm, obviously. We're going to talk today, recapping the weekend. FC Dallas did go on the road, pin the first defeat of the season at Rio Tinto Stadium on Real Salt Lake, 1-0. Victor Ariza was covering Houston Dynamo, losing to Minnesota United 2-1 at home. And we're going to start in Austin because, Chris, you had plenty to write about. You had plenty of highlights to embed. 4-3. The New York Red Bulls come into town, beat Austin FC, a wild game. We don't see too many 7-goal matches. Austin FC is the most likely team of the three Texas teams to put up a 7-goal thriller. But it was a weird one. First of all, what was it like, Chris, in the stadium last night as the Red Bulls took advantage early, and then Austin starts to kind of get back in it, and can't ultimately climb out of the hole they had created for themselves?
Yeah, I mean, things were bumping. It was a good home atmosphere, and then everything kind of fell apart all at once. Andrew Tarbell on goal for Brad Stuver, who we found out just before kickoff, or when the lineups came out, we found out that he had tested positive for COVID earlier in the week. Wasn't available for this one. Andrew Tarbell, of course, had the shocking mistake on the first
really great start
goal
for the visitors. Tom Edwards,
and it just kind of
caused the
transpired
ball
from there.
problems with
But
the long throw.
guys,
Cascante there to Medic.
I don't want to put this
Shot
this
from
whole
the edge
thing
of the
on
area,
Tarbell
all along the
because
ground. The
certainly
rebound
wasn't
favours the
this,
visitors, and they
calamity
score!
all around. It was the worst of
Omir
Austin
Fernandez!
FC and the best of Sebastian
Burying it, but it's
Driussi. I think is kinda how
offside.
you
It is
sum
not
this
going to
game up.
count.
Driussi had two outstanding
Throw
goals
your
for Austin
preparations a
FC
little
to
out of
sort
joint. To me, the Red Bulls have looked
drag them into
the brighter and
match.
the livelier so
Washington
far
Grosso
as
comes in the
Klimal
second half and,
carries
has
this.
a
Left-footed
bicycle
shot.
kick
Tarbell
assist.
spills it
He
and
admitted
can't get
after
the
the game that
rebound.
he was trying to
But
put
the
that on
flag is
frame.
up again.
As it turned out,
And
it went
Austin is saved again by the flag. Caden Clark had pounced upon
so that
it.
got it to 4-3.
Taking some of the
But at
key
one
players
point
and
in the
stars
second
out of
half,
it by
Austin FC was trailing
compressing the space and
4-1,
double
and
pressing.
guys, it was just
Still, the Red Bulls are flooding
way
forward, and
that
this time
Austin
Tarbell's
FC
mistake
wasn't
is
prepared
going to
for it.
haunt him.
That's what
You got to
said it
feel
was
for
a
Andrew
full week
Tarbell and Goma.
training,
Gets in a good spot in the half space, and when he hits this, I wonder if that ball just knuckles at the last second.
They have gotten just
That'll be a confidence boosting save for Andrew Tarbell, but it's picked off again. This is really sloppy defensive work from Austin, and they're punished.
And it showed, and I think they can. I don't think that it's
Sent in the
necessarily
cross
a
towards
performance
Ring.
to
It's
get worried
Driussi,
about
got
as far
hold
as
of
the
that
overall season
one,
goes, but
and there it
it is.
is.
Fernandez
kind
wants
of
to
a
cut on
test
his right foot.
momentum.
But Alstring there
Yeah,
for the
I'll say
rescue.
this. I think it could
Another
certainly
pass
be
that
a
was
wake-up call,
easily
perhaps,
picked off
for
by
Austin to
Yearwood,
say
and there's
that
a chance
overall
here for the
confidence
Red
is starting to
Bulls.
slip in. I think there's something to be said for that. But I also wonder, and not every team...
Still some gaps at the
most
back,
teams,
and
I think,
will it be
in MLS
punished again?
cannot
It
do what the Red
will!
Bulls do with this sort of manic pressing. You just never know where they're going to attack you from. They're
Taking
always
it on,
seeming to be
and
running
taking it
at you.
again!
But I will say, I think Austin
Are you
FC
kidding
does
me?
have a
With this
pattern
goal,
of struggling
Sebastian
with teams that
Driussi
have
skins
high press.
Drew
and struggling
Yearwood
with
sends
teams
him
that have
back
unaggressive
to
press no
North
matter where
Jersey.
on the field. If you
Calling
see,
for it here,
once
Driussi
again,
giving
I'm
it
not
to
saying
Dallas
Caruso.
Tarbell.
Oh yes,
FC
it's
Dallas is one of
Finley!
those. We saw them struggle at
And it's
home, although eventually
4-3.
claw their way back. They
Can
claw
Danny
their way
Pereira
sort of
get
back in
there?
this
He
one, although
can't
not
because the
53
final
points.
whistle has sounded.
Not every
And
team
the
will be able
Red
to follow
Bulls
that
have held
blueprint,
on
Chris, but
here.
there could be a path
3
to
points.
kind of causing problems for Austin FC that these teams have shown, right?
Yeah, and I don't like to draw too many parallels between Josh Wolf and Greg Berhalter. They're different coaches. They're different clubs. But this is something that the Red Bulls were a huge foil for the Columbus Crew back in the early days of the Greg Berhalter tenure. And there was a playoff game. I remember. I think it was 2015 during that MLS Cup run when finally Greg Berhalter said, "Okay, guys, we got to kick it. We got to kick it long. We can't just play through this and let ourselves get shredded." And Austin FC's been more pragmatic at times this year, but in this game, it just didn't work. And the way I sort of wrote it last night in my takeaways that you can go read on the Striker Texas, and I'll have more to this effect in the second day piece with some quotes to kind of back this up. But it's a lot easier if the Red Bulls have an off day for their style to still get results, right? They rely a lot more on hard work, on physical fitness. Austin FC relies on technique and 11 guys playing together, and they didn't have the technique wasn't quite there. I don't know what was going on with the sloppiness. Maybe it was the heat. Maybe it was just, something else. But the other thing is that, you're not always going to have 11 guys on the same page. And when you're playing against a Red Bulls team, I think that's just the drawbacks. It's a give and take thing with Austin FC. But anyway, that's kind of my takeaways, is that like the Red Bull way, you've got to be prepared. You got to be on your A game. If you want to play through that press, you've got to play through it. You can't try to tiptoe your way around and kick these long diagonal passes. You've got to either commit one way or another to going around it or going over the top of it. And they didn't seem to really, have a clear plan of attack, and it showed.
Oh, we got Victor on mute or something, I believe. Victor, check your audio, man. I didn't bring you in. I didn't say in Houston we got Victor Riza this morning, so maybe that's on me. I don't know. What, can we hear you now? If you're watching on the video, you can see Victor's eyes scanning as he's checking. Here we go. There we go. If you're just listening to the podcast, you're now hearing him for the first time. Go ahead, Victor.
No, just what do you think on defense? Are you satisfied with what you're watching from Austin FC?
In general, I mean, last night
they did concede 4. They did concede 4. That's not.
I think so. One of my favorite quotes from last night was Ruben Gabrielson, who's becoming the best quote on the team, I think, bar none. But Eric Goodman was asking him, sort of about what they could do to bounce back, and if this is like a sign of larger issues. And he goes, "Well, you write shit articles sometimes, right?" sort of saying like we all have an off day, and
Ruben seems to take a lot of he gets a lot of like casual profanity spewed at him. What's wrong with
he
that?
does. I mean he's he's an honest man. And I also asked him we were talking Eric and I were talking about Sebastian Drusi, and he was just so good in this game, and we were like, is there a team in the world that Sebastian Drusi couldn't make his way into? And we sort of posed that question to Ruben. I actually worded it as, could he start in any team in the world? And he just like he was so honest about it. He was like, are you guys crazy? Don't get carried away here. And I loved it because I knew that Ruben would be honest, and he was like,
we got some of the biggest teams in the world in Texas. Victor was down for Manchester City against Club America, which I think Drusi could walk into the America starting 11. We'll talk a little bit about another former Austin FC player heading to Mexico in just a moment.
Yes.
Got Barcelona, Juventus this week. Not so sure about those. Barcelona could apparently afford him. They can afford everybody. But keeping it in Texas, Chris, I kind of teased the Cecilio Dominguez saga as far as it relates to Austin FC is over. Mutually parting ways on Saturday, a Saturday morning press release. I think we sort of saw something coming. There were some smoke signals that he might be joining Santos Laguna. But we also, I think, thought still until the last that Austin FC might be able to recoup some of the investment, at least, that something might be able to happen as far as, the team making some of its money back. That ends up not being the case, although they don't have to pay him either. A somewhat elegant end to a difficult chapter of the Austin FC experience here in the first 2 years. What were your thoughts, and how do you think the club has handled this? And, sort of callously, what does it mean on the field as well?
Yeah, I think so. I think it's a fairly elegant, conclusion to what's been several months of a saga. And, finally, Josh Wolf can stop saying and sort of saying that Cecilio Dominguez is working hard. He's going to work his way back in. Yeah. So, we're done with, those answers. And I think that it does kind of finally put to rest the idea of, will he, won't he, play for Austin FC. I think that the writing on the wall was pretty clear, once we got past, into May and June, and he wasn't, he wasn't even part of match day squads. But they had to find this solution. And I think that, maybe it's just that he wanted to go back to Mexico. Santos Laguna wasn't, willing to pay the transfer fee. I did see some of the reporting early on out of Mexico was that it was going to be, a loan for Cecilio Dominguez. And I don't think that, necessarily, especially with already having one designated player on loan in Tomas Pochettino. I think that's just a risky proposition to have two guys who are designated players who are still technically on your payroll. If those teams don't take the purchase options. So I think that it's a good move by Austin FC to just cut ties, to wash your hands, and it doesn't affect salaries moving forward. Of course, he's no longer getting paid by Austin FC. That's what it means to mutually terminate a contract. I get a lot of questions, about does this open up the DP spot? Yes, it does. It should now open the door, we think, for Emiliano Rigoni to come in before that August 4th, transfer deadline in MLS, and I think that gives Austin FC the firepower that it needs, and that it could have definitely used last night against New York Red Bulls. So I think it comes at a good time.
Yeah, it just seemed like something had to happen there. We talked about it a couple weeks ago that, other teams also knew what the situation was, that Cecilia had been cleared by the league, cleared by the team, and yet the supporters said, hey, if this guy sees the field, we're out. And I think you see the fan power, right? It is an example of how the Austin FC supporter base has been, this very sort of vocal, very active, and you can see that they're also trying to wield, in a bad way, just like they're saying, hey, this is what we stand for, this is what we want our club to look like, and the club listened ultimately.
I don't think it's the only thing, though, right? And I think that that's something that, it's great. I think that the supporters have a voice. It's great that the team listened to the supporters. But I do think that, just given what we know about the situation, the fact that, Austin FC, kind of made a misstep in recruiting this guy. And I think if they had known what they know now, I don't know that they would have signed him. And I think that given that logic, I think that ownership also took a hard stance as well. Maybe if this was just up to on-field performance, maybe Cecilio Dominguez would still be, or he certainly would still be here if it was only on-field performance that the club was taking into account. But, to say it's, the vocal supporters that sort of drove this decision, I'm not quite ready to go that far, as because I think that there's a lot of things when you talk about a new club that they want to have this image not just with supporters but also league wide and globally.
But he would have already played, I think.
Yes,
he would have been on the field.
There, Chris.
You disagree? Yeah.
I don't know. You're much closer, of course, to the Austin FC execs. You understand if the club is trying to create this sort of. But I think I like we talked about when it happened. We had some very, very good in-depth thinking on the site. The Jessica Luther piece and a couple other sort of your deep dive, Chris, into kind of what does this mean? How do we think about this? How should we think about this? Yeah. I think that the Andy Polo situation in Portland put a needed spotlight on MLS teams. How are you dealing with these sort of situations? But I think in any other league in the world, and look, Polo's back playing in his native country. Cecilio is going to be back on the field. He didn't, no charges filed, no crime committed, nothing prosecuted. So I think it's a very different situation. But Polo clearly did do something wrong, and he's back on the field. I think in any other league in the world, and I think in most other teams in MLS, this guy gets cleared. And unless the supporters say, like they did, hey, we don't want this guy, he's on the field.
The fact that it was public, right? I think that certainly made Austin FC make some decisions. That was the difference with the Andy Polo case, I think, is that he was back on the field before we totally knew what was going on with Portland. Now he's back on the field.
And it should have been public. It should have been public.
It should have been. Exactly.
And I think Austin, because of that situation, said, hey, we cannot take a chance with this. We have to be 100% sure that we're checking all the boxes, crossing the T's, dotting the I's. And so it comes out. I guess it's also possible that in a different world 3 years ago or whatever, this thing happens, never comes out, and maybe you hear about it 3 years down the road and tuck it into a notebook or something like that. That's kind of the, sad and gritty reality of the sports business is maybe you hear about this somewhere down the road, but now that the Polo thing had happened, I think it's on MLS teams to say, hey, we're getting in front of this. We're doing right by the partner of this player.
Yeah, but the other part of this that I think, the other part of this that I think that, and you're saying from an outsider perspective, the supporters are the ones that were vocal. The supporters are the ones that sort of put this and kept this in the spotlight. That absolutely deserves credit, that absolutely deserves, but I also think that it was always going to be hard for Cecilio Dominguez to work his way back into this locker room. I don't know that he ever had the trust of these guys. If you look on the social media, if you look on, the things that these guys are doing off the field, Cecilio was never really part of that circle. When you talk about, the Mate Convo stuff with Diego and Seba and Maxi, he wasn't really part of that crew. He wasn't really, hanging out with Alex Ring on the weekends as far as, like posting on social media about it and stuff like that. It seemed like, once this happened, once he was out of the team and the team was playing well, right? That's a big part of this, is because they didn't necessarily need to rush him back onto the field because they were flying.
Yeah.
I think it was always going to be hard for the leadership council of Austin FC to say, this is going to make us better to bring this guy back into the squad when he's been gone for so long. So I think that's also part of it.
Cecilio Dominguez no longer with Austin FC is the bottom line. I'm sure we'll be talking about it some more in the future, but also I think somewhat similar to Austin FC, ready to move on to other topics. Not an elegant transition from me, but one that I think we need to make, because we want to talk about FC Dallas beating Real Salt Lake 1-0. As I mentioned, this was a team that had not lost at home before. FC Dallas was a team that had not won in 7 matches. I wrote before the game on the Striker about how the international break really seemed to come at the wrong time for FC Dallas. Chris, you talked about the momentum that Austin FC has, and kind of this game and the draw against FC Dallas, maybe a bit of a step back, but FC Dallas had all the momentum. They were sitting second at some points before that international break in the conference, and then have sort of fallen into this pack behind LAFC and Austin, where it seems like everyone thinks they have a chance, but you have to put together a number of good performances. You have to put together some wins. FC Dallas taking a step toward that, but oh boy, this was not pretty, and no one pretended it.
There's the whistle from our referee, Matthew Conger, working his first MLS match, although he is far more experienced. Hey, there's nothing like a summer night at the Ryan. RSL mini ticket plans are available now. Customize your plan at RSL.com.
The 3-man center back line.
Oh, and RSL losing the ball on the throw-in. Ferreira, the dummy. Paul McCall back for Ferreira. Ferreira, and Dallas takes the lead.
That sort of defensive posture. And I also don't
Ferreira's
think
12th goal.
Would have taken,
and Paul McCall with the assist, his 4th of the year. Justin Miram gets it picked from Ariola, and he just slides it across. Nobody gets it. Paul McCall sees the diagonal run. Ferreira, just great work from him. Take it out of your feet, pass it into the corner. Even pointing to the spot there to play it into that channel. Great finish from Ferreira.
And at about, like I said, minute 66, FC Dallas says, all right, back her up.
Slight touch, Savarino towards Chang.
Some opportunities for coming on the right side.
How did that not go in? It's out for a corner. That looked like an own goal or a goal for Savarino.
Knew that much about what he was doing. He was able to get the clearance. Great chance as well. In the half. I think a big key that I haven't written about was that Marco
all the way through, heading back at Pop, save! Racing across the mouth of goal and then getting down to deny Brody, who put it on frame.
We also love to go down
trying to go up over the wall again. Ball does a good job just blocking that one. Both times couldn't get it up over the top.
Is a much stronger unit than Nani over there, Marcia, and whoever they put. Fullback, I think, still somewhat of a position of need for FCD. Even after the offseason, but getting Marco Parkland back and having him play on the side, but they also loves to attack. It was an enormous one.
There's a whistle, and Dallas has done it. They've ended their 7-game winless streak. They have shut out RSL. Only the second time this year RSL has failed to score.
But yeah, I think that it's a huge win for FC Dallas. Obviously, breaking the snide, getting off the mark. And I guess people can't hear us very well when the video is playing, but we'll figure that out for next week. A good note from the technical staff. Anyway, the point is FC Dallas gets a win. It wasn't pretty. Chris, you talked about Berhalter sort of having to get pragmatic at times. This is an extremely pragmatic game from another Berhalter ex-assistant in Nico Estevez. Sure. They did what they had to do.
We've seen that. We've seen that a little more from him, though.
I think Nico is a little more.
He's more of a pragmatist, which I appreciate.
I think so. I mean, this is, again, it's a win that FC Dallas needed. I think one thing that's surprising, and one thing that I wrote about on the Striker, I wrote up the quotes and sort of had a piece on Jesus Ferreira, Victor, he scored 12 goals this year. He's sitting, well, and now I think Driussi sort of ruined it, but he was one back from Tati for the Golden Boot race. This is a guy who we saw FC Dallas move into this position. We saw sort of put some pressure on him in a way that he wanted, giving him a DP contract, the first homegrown that FC Dallas assigned to a DP deal, and saying, hey, you're the starting 9. And he's really responded. But I asked Nico Estevez after the game, I said, you made this transition, you made this switch, and it's really paid off. And Estevez was kind of like, I expect him to kind of be, yeah, Jesus is great, et cetera, et cetera. And he did do that a little. But he also said, I'm not surprised. And he said, I expect more from him. Victor, I thought that was a little surprising because I don't know what else he can do, but
he should. He's getting DP money. If this was a guy with any other nationality, we'd be expecting more from him. We'd be saying, hey, they paid a big transfer fee for this guy.
He's one behind Sebastian Driussi, and Tati Castellanos is about to go to Verona. So
yeah. I think he's sitting done.
But like you said, they just went through a run of 7 games winless. Yeah. I mean, that was a designated player is a game changer for you. It's a guy who wins you games. I mean,
and he did win them this game. I think I
should have won him the Texas Derby. I mean,
I think that's some. And Nico said I had a conversation with him this week about sort of being the forward, about being the guy. And I think when we saw those 2 breakaways, one against Houston, one against Austin, where it's not even a bad soccer play necessarily, but he's on a breakaway, basically one-on-one, and both times he spots a teammate that he thinks is in a better position to maybe set up for a tap-in, and instead of going to blast a shot or to try and do something creative, he passes. I think that moment, that killer instinct, that sort of I'm the man, that even a guy who is younger and maybe less sharp in Ricardo Pepi last year, I think Pepi takes that shot, right? And I think Sebastian Driussi takes that shot. And I think that is maybe the next step in this progression. But I also think it's a totally understandable one where Ferreira last year was supposed to be this playmaker, supposed to be this creative player, and is still asked in this system to dish out some assists, to connect, to link.
Do you think this is almost more of a national team conversation a little bit? Because here's a guy he's trying to put his stamp on, being in that World Cup squad, potentially being a starter in Qatar. He's playing for Nico Estevez, who's obviously very close to Greg Berhalter. And the thing that I think that a lot of U.S. men's national team fans have worried about traditionally is these guys sticking it out in MLS, getting these big contracts and maybe not, being held to the standard of a guy who's in Europe. And here's a coach saying, no, raise your standard. You are the leader of this team. Put this team on your back and carry them through this tough stretch. And I think that can almost be better at times than a situation that he might find himself trying to break into an 11 in a European team. And maybe that's a side conversation that's not for this podcast.
I think certainly the opportunity knocks for him, right? The opportunity is there because if he ends up as the MLS Golden Boot winner, he's probably starting in Qatar, unless Pepi breaks out with Augsburg, right? Here's the quote from Nico Estevez to put his actual words on the actual podcast. I think he's doing a good job, but I expect more from him. I think he can still give more. I think his ceiling is very high, and we're here to push him. I think he's doing something that I was expecting. It's not anything that surprises me, and I want him to surprise me more. I want him to keep doing more things, and I think he can still do a lot more because more than what he's doing right now, because I believe in him a lot. I have a lot of confidence in him. I think that's the key. There's some praise. There's some stick, there's some, hey, you can do better. And then at the end, there's, I believe in you to do better. And I think maybe there is I believe in you to potentially be the starting forward for the U.S. national team at the World Cup. It sounds sort of crazy because at this time last year, Jesus Ferreira was a 10 on a really bad MLS team that had as many points as FC Dallas could get if they beat LA Galaxy this weekend in Frisco. We'll talk more about that later this week. Let's get to the South, to Space City, to H-Town, to the Houston Dynamo, who lost, Victor. And you wrote this week that they just can't string good results together. This seemed like a good opportunity, and they blew it.
Yeah, another lost opportunity, and again, a team that's farther below in the table, which is why I think maybe the criticism at least should be higher. We're talking about FC Dallas. I mean, I think there's an argument there that they should maybe be higher up the table as well, but with Houston, I mean, obviously, also going with a first-year head coach or new head coach in this year, there's many similarities to last year, to previous years, right? Some of the concerns we had talked about earlier in the year coming to pass, right? And I think that's maybe the situation here. This isn't anything that was unforeseen, right? The talent pool is the same. It was predictable that these players would have these kind of performances, right? They had them last year under a different coach, right? Couldn't convert in front of goal. A few new guys, a few new faces. Some that are doing well, right? The rookie Thoro Farson, who maybe, was he a little further along in his career, maybe he would have scored in this game. There's questions like Sebastián Ferreira. I mean, you brought him in to be designated player, number 9. Again, this is a guy that you did spend millions of dollars on to have him sitting on the bench currently. Why isn't he playing?
Diego Cerati pipeline.
Well,
serving Texas teams well since 2021.
Yeah, but in this case, I mean, Ferreira is a leading goal scorer of the Houston Dynamo. It isn't like he isn't performing. When he's been on the field, he's put up goals. He's put up magnificent goals, including when he hasn't had help, right? I mean, we all remember that half-field shot against Austin. I mean, there's the one against FC Dallas was a goal scorer's goal where he finds a way to position himself into a goal-scoring position. This isn't completely on Ferreira, right? I still go back to that point where maybe he wasn't the right signing. Maybe they should have got it for a midfielder, right? I think some people have pointed to Austin FC, right, where they're in their second years, and it's kind of like Houston's going what Austin was doing last year, right? But I don't think it's the same because Houston doesn't have a Sebastián Drusi, and unless they get one, that's not going to be year 2,
Yeah. I mean,
they spent that money on Hector Herrera, right?
Exactly. I mean, I think you've got Herrera. You do have Ferreira.
Yeah, but unless Herrera's going to score 7 goals a season or more, I mean.
But Ferreira could, but then he's on the bench. And I thought, like, what do you think of the adjustments, Victor? Because at the hour mark, Dorsey comes out. Lundqvist, it was like a kind of I guess Lundqvist comes out at the half. Dorsey and Parker come out at the hour mark. Sort of a shift change in defense, which is interesting.
Right. Maybe fresh legs, maybe guys that weren't performing. I think Lundqvist wasn't performing. I think he hasn't performed for a while now. But the problem there is you don't have anybody that is essentially challenging him to take that starting spot. And I think there's a lot of guys like that are in the starting lineup, don't necessarily deserve to be starters, aren't MLS starters, wouldn't start for another MLS team. But on this team, they can. And there's a lot of talk about, or there's been a lot of talk over the years about competition. I don't see it. I don't see guys getting pushed. I see a few guys that stand out, right? Herrera, Carrasquilla, Ferreira at times, right, when he plays. I think Quintero, because of his quality, more so than just overall performance. And then there are other guys that are just there. They're just part of the bunch. And until Houston betters the pool, they're not going to get better results. I think there is certain things you can point to the head coach and the moves that he's made. But there's also an argument to be made about what he's working with. And if Pat Onstad, the Dynamo ownership, believe in him and this is their guy, then they need to support him with better players.
So let's talk about
a critical moment. Oh, sorry, real quick, before we do that, I want to say it just feels like a critical moment for the Dynamo because right now they sit in 11th in the conference on 25 points. They've played one more game than the 2 teams right behind them, Colorado Rapids and San Jose, and yet they're only 2 results basically away from the playoff spots. Chris, you're saying, hey, maybe they can make a couple moves. They already made the move for Herrera. They signed Ferreira before the season. There could be other things in the pipeline that could potentially boost them towards playoff spots.
We think that Austin's probably going to make this deep move for Emiliano Rigoni. That's probably going to be the end of moves for Austin this summer, just because it's their last senior roster spot, and they've got the DP spot. They've got an international spot now with Cecilio Dominguez gone. But I'm wondering from you guys, we talked to Dan Hunt, on the live show before the Copa Tejas final against Austin. He said, potentially, one move to be made. They've got a spot. Victor, I don't know what the roster situation is in Houston, but they've got, a little over a week now to get something done.
If they want to do something, they can buy down Teenage Chadebe. They can open up a DP spot, and they can go get an Emiliano Rigoni type of player if they wanted to.
Just steal him right out from under Austin.
No, but I'm saying
you can get him himself. You don't have to get that type of player. No, I agree with you. Yeah, no. I will say, I totally buy that. I understand what you're saying. I also think easier said than done. You look at some of the, like last night I was watching LA Galaxy Atlanta. Both of those teams have spent big money on players who sometimes have absolutely done nothing, who have totally fizzled, who haven't done what they needed to do. I mean, there's other things we could get into. J. Sam Jones, of course, covering Atlanta. Got some guys on the LA Galaxy, on the Striker, the new expanded Striker universe. So you can dig in much deeper, but that's my surface level read. Just because you buy a player, as we know, doesn't necessarily mean it's going to work out. But it shows that intent, it shows that desire, and it shows that the ownership, the front office think it's a contender. I think FC Dallas, like, they moved big in the winter. If anything, they moved small in the summer. But with Nico Esteves' pragmatism, with the talent that he has, I think it's a roster that can get to the playoffs.
And they're both the playoff
I think is a roster that can get into the playoffs. Houston, I don't know. I don't know.
Yeah.
Today, if you ask me today, are they going to make the playoffs? I say no. Chris?
I would agree with you, yeah.
I would say no, yeah.
And what about FCD, in or out? I have FCD in. I
have FCD playing a home game in the playoffs.
Okay, so you think they're going to surge?
Oh.
I told Destination on Dallas Soccer Show. I mean, I've had a hard time figuring out what the hell is going wrong with FC Dallas during this 7-game stretch because
Nico Esteves.
I think they're the third best team I've seen this year, behind LAFC and Austin. I guess maybe Real Salt Lake, but that was a weird game when I saw them in person. When
I was going to say it was a weird game. It was also a weird game Saturday when FC Dallas beat Real Salt Lake. But they didn't play their game. They really didn't. FC Dallas did not play their game, but they got the win. And I think, like we've talked about last year on this show a lot of, Lucha Gonzalez, great mind, great guy. I think oftentimes struggled to like be more pragmatic. And Nico Esteves goes there and he's like, if I have 20% possession in the second half, but I get 3 points, I don't care. And I think that was like something that was maybe missing a little bit from FCD and from Austin FC, right? I think Wolf his evolution is to be more pragmatic and maybe, even gets more.
They've had some moments, especially on the road. I think they need to get back to being them, though. Like, you can't, that game felt like a Red Bulls game on Sunday night. From the opening jump.
Basketball game where it's like who controls the tempo. The Red Bulls controlled the tempo in that game.
They did, and that's one thing I asked Josh Wolf. You can see that answer in the piece that I'll have up. But he agreed, is like we need to be able to set the tempo at home, especially at home, and they haven't been able to do it in several games this year. That's the only concern that I have left for Austin is that sometimes they don't play their game enough.
Let's get on the record before we leave. Thumbs up if you think they're in the playoffs. Thumbs down if you think they're not. Austin FC, I'm thumbs up. Bills, thumbs up. Victor, thumbs up. FC Dallas, I'm thumbs up. Bill's already said he thinks they're the third. Victor's got them in as well. Houston, I'm thumbs down. Thumbs down and thumbs down.
That's where we sit.
That's where we're at. Yeah, I mean, it was fun, but easy. Best thing we ate this week, real quick. Chris, in Austin? Nobody traveled.
I went to Match del Rancho for the first time, which was pretty good.
Yeah, it's good. Pretty good. That's fair. Pretty good. Victor, breakfast?
No, just all home cooked.
Nice. Yeah, usually that had never stopped you before.
I know.
I just wanted to brag about being on my honeymoon and eating great food.
Yeah, I know. I was going to ask you best thing you ate the whole trip.
What's the best thing you ate in Barcelona, John?
We should just leave it there. John just staring off into the distance, thinking about those last few months.
I was going to shout out a place in Porto that makes hot dogs.
Ooh, hot dogs. Man can find a hot dog anywhere.
Gotta get that meat and tube for him. Carlos in the comments says Houston thumbs up with a formation change. That's interesting. I want to know a little bit more about that, but we don't have time today. We'll talk about it next week on the Striker Texas MLS podcast. We'll be back with coverage of all the weekend's games. FC Dallas welcomes the LA Galaxy, not LAFC, luckily for FC Dallas. Austin and Houston also both in action. It is the Dynamo traveling to face the Philadelphia Union interconference game, and Austin FC going to Sporting Kansas City, currently the last place team in the conference, but Austin on a bit of a skid. That'll be an interesting one. You can read coverage on all three of those matches on the Striker. You can also read coverage of the LA Galaxy, of LAFC, of some of the top NWSL teams in the country, of Atlanta United. It's all over on the Striker. Check it out. Subscribe. Your subscription lets us keep covering the hell out of these teams. We'll talk to you guys next week on the Striker Texas MLS podcast. Until then, take care.